Hey guys, welcome back to another whiteboard chat. And today I have a really good topic that was requested in my story. So I did another one of the question boxes where you could drop in, or suggestion box where you could drop in a topic. Now, some of you guys had really good suggestions, but they were more like a single question rather than a topic. They were kind of too small for me to cover in like a 10, 15, 20 minute video. So if I didn't answer yours, you can maybe just drop it into the next Q&A. It's probably going to be a little more appropriate for something like that. So the one that I did find really interesting, and I think it's actually a really good topic, is the science behind metabolic adaptation. So I wanted to attempt to break this down into something that was pretty easy to understand and also pretty applicable and not too lengthy. So I think I was able to accomplish that. We'll see. But yeah, without making this like ridiculously long, each one of these items could probably have their own like subtopic, and a lot of them do in some of my other videos, so you can always reference that. But let's talk about what metabolic adaptations are, how they occur through different mechanisms, and yeah. So first off, when I say metabolic adaptation, we're talking about metabolic adaptation specifically to weight loss, right? Not losing weight, body fat, whatever it might be. Things that, or mechanisms that make it more difficult in the ways that your body adapts to prolonged calorie deficit, large calorie deficit, and also other factors that go along with that, like stress. Not only acute stress, but chronic stress, because that's often part of the equation for a lot of people, unfortunately, and in turn that makes the adaptations a lot worse. Now, first off, everyone's, capacity for metabolic adaptation is going to be different. I've seen figures thrown out, and I just don't necessarily agree with them, simply because I think it's too hard to test a large enough a sample size, and also the correct sample size. Like, so for example, the metabolic adaptation between a typical person trying to lose weight versus someone that's going to extreme low body fat, there are other factors we have to consider, right? We always talk about this, the further away that you get from your natural set point, the more these adaptations tend to occur. So really, how far are we pushing? How long are we pushing? How low are we taking the calories, and so on and so forth. Now, that's not to say that your average Gen Pop person wanting to lose weight can't have a pretty extreme metabolic adaptations and or hormonal adaptations, because they absolutely can, and I see it often. Now, some of that could be through kind of a subtopic I won't really cover here, but something like on the epigenetic level that's really that's occurred over a really long period of time. So specifically Gen Pop folks that, well, I won't even say that, specifically anyone really, even competitors that have done these like yo-yos over the years, they've never had long enough recovery periods from their deficits, noticing this over time, even though a lot of these markers that you might measure are otherwise okay. So and you will see that. Now, talk about some of these adaptations. Now, on a mitochondrial level, I think I spelled mitochondrial correctly, hopefully. So if anyone remembers from high school science classes or college science classes, your mitochondria, quite a few different processes that go on in there in regards to energy production and energy usage, metabolism, so on and so forth. So a lot of these processes can potentially be disrupted, slowed down, sped up, altered through extreme deficits or extreme stress or extreme inflammation, or any of these things that occur over the long term in these large or more extreme fat loss attempts, right? Thermic effect of food or TEF. Now, if you eat less, your thermic effect of food goes down because you're eating less food, right? So you're probably chewing less. Now, that's not always true simply because, you know, you might try to find like more voluminous and complex foods that do have a higher TEF. So let's I'll give you an example. So like right now, you know, I'll do some powders and things like that in my diet that probably don't have a very high thermic effect because they're easy to break down. Whereas I might do like more vegetables and steak and things like that that are really filling for a longer period of time if calories are lower. So yeah, that does, you know, that does play into it some, but you know, generally, if you have half the calories that you're normally eating, then your thermic effect or the, you know, amount of calories you're burning from thermic effects probably going down. All right. So the juicy stuff, hormonal, or you could say hormonal slash, you know, hormonal slash metabolic. Though most of these things are actual hormones, right? So thyroid production, it's always a big one, right? Thyroid production and conversion. So we know that there are a couple steps, and you guys can go refer back to my thyroid videos. I've done, at least one, I'm not sure, maybe two, but we know that there's a couple signaling pathways that happen before we end up with our thyroid hormones. Now, our body does produce a small amount of T3 or our active thyroid hormone, but we're mainly relying on T4 to convert, right? So TSH signaling. Now, when our thyroid hormones are going down or our body's being stressed out, TSH may go up. And what does that mean? More signaling. So the body is signaling that we need, hey, we need more T4, right? We need more T4, or we need more thyroid hormone. So we'll end up over here, T4. Now, I drew these arrows. The arrows don't mean like a cycle or a pathway. The arrows simply mean for T4 to T3 conversion, it's typically going to go down. T4 to RT3 or reverse T3 conversion usually goes up. And a lot of that is simply from stress, inflammation, and cortisol. That's going to be one of the main, or a couple of the main things that are going to lower T4 to T3 conversion. So a lot of the time, what we may see in people with metabolic adaptations, we may see a decreased conversion from T4 to T3, okay? So our reverse T3 goes up. That's why it's important to check reverse T3, especially in people that have, especially in people that are stressed, or especially in people that have maybe, we'll say like normal, normal-ish T4 and low T3. Well, that's probably a conversion issue, right? So yeah, that's generally what you're going to see. Is you're going to see, really this should be flip-flopped. Really, reverse T3 should be down, and conversion of T4 to T3 should be higher. That's not what's going to happen in a high-stress environment. And what makes this even worse is our actual total thyroid production may actually go down as well. The signaling pathway can't really keep up. We end up with less thyroid hormone. We end up with less, not only less T4, but then less T3 because of less signaling. So it's just real mess, right? Now, some of the literature that I've seen doesn't show a huge deviation in thyroid hormone. It's not a huge percentage. It's not a very large percentage, but it certainly does play into it. I mean, if it didn't, then giving somebody a thyroid medication during, you know, contest prep wouldn't make that much of a difference, right? But sometimes it does. So it just depends, and every person's going to be a little bit different, right? And there are other factors. There are other micronutrients and things that can cause this lack of conversion. So, I mean, there are some other things that could potentially come into play. All right. So, all right. Leptin. Leptin has to be probably one of the, if not the heaviest hitter here. So leptin mainly coming from fat cells. Now, the problem here is that we get some leptin response not only from level of food, but also body fat levels, right? So body fat levels go down, leptin goes down. It's simple, right? Now, you know, when we're shrinking all these fat cells, we're getting leaner, 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 there isn't really a whole lot that we can do to bring leptin back up. We know that, right, refeeding, right, especially extended periods, can help. Now, all that's really doing is it's giving some increased signaling that, hey, we have food intake coming in. That doesn't mean that we're, you know, refilling a bunch of fat cells, so we're really not getting the full effect of signaling until we regain body fat. So you're kind of screwed, right? You know, there's only so much you can do about leptin when your body fat stores are depleted, considering that's one of the main signaling mechanisms. So, you know, without regaining body fat, you're kind of SOL when it comes to leptin. Now, generally, I notice again, people that are naturally leaner probably have less decrease in leptin signaling. So, again, further away you get from your set point, the worse it's going to be, right? Cortisol, oh my. Well, I should also say that leptin does have some other indirect effects in some of these metabolic processes, but we know that it's the fat burning hormone, right? Primarily is what it's coined as, so we'll kind of leave it at that. But cortisol, well, cortisol isn't necessarily directly going to decrease, basal metabolic rate or something like that. It doesn't change, thermodynamics. You're still, it's still going to boil down to calories in and calories out. Now, however, cortisol can have some really big effects, and it does. It does during preps and during long fat loss phases, because people are getting stressed out. Their body's getting stressed out from training load. Their body's getting stressed out from long periods of calorie deficit. Their body's getting stressed out from thinking about the show that they have to do or whatever, right? So it absolutely makes a difference. Now, a couple things. I drew some arrows here. So cortisol's effect on sex hormones. Now we know, especially in females, if you've watched any of the other videos talking about things like progesterone steal and estrogen dominance, for example, even some cases like extended periods like hyperandrogenism. So I mean, there are a lot of downstream effects that it could potentially have on adrenal hormones in women, more so just because there's more interplay there in the adrenal glands. Now, in men, still has some effects. Testosterone levels, there's some interplay there in that feedback loop. And I'll talk about some of these hormones here as well. But yeah, it's still going to have negative effects on men as well. Interestingly enough, cortisol can actually decrease the efficiency of leptin and its function. So again, you're really, really screwed when it comes to leptin. If you're stressed out and your leptin's already down, you've got basically the double whammy here. You're in big trouble when it comes to leptin levels. So stress reduction is massive. Anything that you can possibly do to keep your body's cortisol regulated and not overtax your adrenal glands and keep yourself in a sympathetic state all the time, the better off you're going to be. All right. Now, generally, and I'm going to give you some exceptions here, but talking about what hormones may look like, okay, when we're talking about metabolic or hormonal adaptation. So thyroid's probably going to go down, right? Guys and gals, we talked about that. Testosterone can often go down. Now, especially in males, in fact, the research shows that it like plummets. It goes down a lot. Hypogonadism levels, like we're talking very, very low. Generally, most guys can recover, but it does take some time. And there are cases where long and chronic over dieting things could cause some more permanent issues, but it can go down in women as well. But hyperandrogenism is something that can happen downstream eventually. I don't see it a whole lot, but it does happen. It's normally a longer term effect, and in the long term, I will start seeing that development of hyperandrogenism, PCOS, and things like that. So, can happen. Androgens go up. I have testosterone, but it would just be like androgens would be the more appropriate term. Estradiol, generally it's going to go down, especially in males, because testosterone goes down, so you have less aromatization to estrogen. Now females, being as that they produce estrogen more directly, it might not necessarily manifest in the same way, but oftentimes it will go down unless we're dealing with an estrogen dominant situation where progesterone is going down and estrogen may go up. We end up with a skewed ratio of estrogen and progesterone, so we have estrogen dominance. Cortisol will play into that for sure. So kind of a couple scenarios there for women, but in males, generally it's going to go down. Natural males. Now we'll say in enhanced males, that's going to be a different story. Cortisol, it's going up. I mean, if you can reduce your cortisol in prep, it's either two reasons. You are a stress perception or reduction master, or you are in full-blown adrenal insufficiency and your cortisol is low. Also not good. Leptin down. We talked about a couple reasons: interactions with cortisol, interacts with some other hormones, and interacts with just directly the amount of fat that you have, right? Ghrelin, we know ghrelin is a hunger hormone. Ghrelin goes up. Ghrelin can be manipulated temporarily too by food intake, but I mean, like anybody knows that, you know, hunger might come and go in waves. Ghrelin, if you guys watch my circadian pattern video, I was talking about how it's actually higher or lower at certain times of the day, and it does respond to some other things. It is a circadian hormone, so it will kind of hit during meal times, right? And it's especially bad in prep, like when you're sitting there watching the clock and like, oh, I normally eat at 10 a.m. I'm really hungry at 9:45 a.m. and I have to suffer to 10, right, or whatever. So it's pretty consistent. It just gets more amplified, right? Okay. Secondary factors, I just wanted to throw these on there because I think it's important to mention. Ghrelin, well, we already talked about that. NEAT levels, yeah, NEAT levels go down generally. I mean, you can track steps and things like that. I think that's, could potentially be a good way to try to balance out that reduction in NEAT. But I mean, it's not a perfect formula because efficiency is also an issue. You become more efficient at everything, and you probably don't even realize it, right? Every movement that you make, even if you're going for a walk, the way that you walk, the way you move your arms, the way you might move your head and look around and do things, or I mean anything. There can be a whole slew of things that occur. Your body's slowly reducing those movements over time and making you more efficient at doing the same thing. So essentially, you can do the same 30-minute session on the treadmill, burn less calories at the end of prep than you did at the beginning. Now that's because of metabolic slowdown. That's also because of efficiency. That's also because of body weight, right? I mean, hell, if you are, 250 pounds and you go down to 200 pounds or 220 pounds, whatever, I mean, you're lighter, right? You're burning less calories. You may have heard of people doing like weighted vests and things like that to kind of offset that. Yep, you could do that. You could literally just slowly overload the vest over time and it would kind of offset some of that, right? You could also offset it by just doing more cardio. I mean, it's all just more at the end of the day, really. But yeah, your body's more efficient, it's lighter, you're moving less mass. So I mean, all those things come into play, and there's a whole bunch of other little factors too. Your body's extremely good at becoming efficient, right? That's the whole goal. So I hope that helps. I hope that sheds some light on metabolic adaptations and kind of some of the science behind it. Whoever suggested it, I forget who it was. It was a great suggestion. I hope this was sciencey enough. If you want to go more in depth about maybe individual segments, I do have some more in-depth videos about some of these segments on my YouTube channel already. And of course you can dive into any research that you want. But I think that covers most of the primary mechanisms, and we'll talk to you next time.